everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Mystery Bible on Podcast. This is episode 21, if you're keeping track. We are bringing you a new segment tonight. You have Dan and Brian and Joel. And this segment is just something that came up pretty organically. What we realized was we're sending each other weird and interesting news articles all throughout the week, and we said we should hit the record button and talk about these. So we're going to call this segment, and any future segments like it that we might do, What in the World is Going On? And each of the co-hosts will have an opportunity to answer that question with any snippets that they want to share with you all, our lovely audience. We're going to tell you some things that are going on. And it's really a little bit of a misnomer to say what in the world is going on, because some of the things that we might say are going on are out of this world. So that's what you can look forward to for this episode. We want it to be a little bit lighthearted, a little bit fun. Please recognize that just because we're bringing something up doesn't mean we are standing by the validity of it or the truth behind it. We're not trying to alarm anybody. We're just saying, here's a crazy story that might be worth taking a look at. And while we try to do some background and some vetting and make sure it's not just a complete hogwash story, if it turns out that the story was false or some of the premise of it was false, don't hold it against us. We have most of the same sources that you do, with only a few exceptions. So that's what we're going to do tonight. And so we invite you to join us here in October, early October of 2023. I think most of the things we're talking about tonight are just weird headlines just from the last 5 days, 10 days. And there's enough of them all the time that we picked a few that we thought were interesting and topical, and we will share them with you now. So buckle up and join us to discuss what in the world is going on. Let's start with Brian, if that's okay with you, Brian. Brian, I know you have some stuff. Share with our audience what in the world is going on.
Okay, well, the things that have been, I guess, getting my goat lately, I've seen a couple articles where people, scientists specifically, are proposing that we should really take this climate catastrophe seriously, and we should put plans in place to actually alter the atmosphere to decrease CO2 levels, prevent the sun's rays from hitting us as much so that things don't heat up as much, which in one article they even said, even if it damages crops, for example. I don't think any of us here on the Mystery Bible on Podcast are what you would call climate deniers, and we're certainly not science deniers. But we generally believe that, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, climate changes over time. It's a natural process that has been set up on this planet, and it has a lot to do with a lot of different things. And so what everyone's up in arms about is how much are humans, after the Industrial Revolution, adding to this issue. And the story that you get told all the time is that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and that's bad. And CO2 is bad because it's trapping heat, and the more CO2 that we have, it's just going to trap that heat, and it's going to turn our world into a desert in the not too distant future. And so we have to fix that. So like here's an article as far back as 2019 from Scientific American, and it says, to fight climate change, we should actually add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So it's like, wait, carbon dioxide is bad. But really what's bad is methane. So if we can get rid of a bunch more methane, then we buy ourselves some time on the whole overheating Earth.
I was going to say, I don't think carbon dioxide became the enemy until around 2020. It was other things before that.
That's right. But, well, as you do, you kind of go down a rabbit hole and you start looking at all of the different things that you can find related to this. And I found some very interesting things. There's a guy out here that I've listened to for a long time that I have a good deal of confidence in his ability to do good research. And his name is Randall Carlson. And he does podcasts that are similar length to our podcasts, and talks. What he does, though, is he goes out and does all of this research and gets all the journal articles. He reads through all the journal articles, and then he points out the findings and whether they are agreeing or disagreeing with the main point of what the media is putting out there on climate. So the current alarmism is that it's going to burn up the planet, the oceans are going to rise, and we're all going to have a terrible time of it. We're going to have mass crop failures. The forests are going away. There's been a story going around that the forests have been shrinking, right? Well, he pulled up 5 different journal articles of people who studied the forest issue for the last 30 years. And it turns out that forests are increasing around the globe by at least 1% a year. And since 1980, they've increased, over 40% because of rising CO2 levels. It turns out that back around the last ice age, CO2 levels were about 150 parts per million in the Earth. Right now, they're over 400 million parts per million right now, CO2 concentration. And so they did a bunch of studies with different kinds of trees, orange trees, a bunch of different crops, and they found that in all those cases, when they increased the levels of CO2 provided to the plants, they, on average, were 33% higher growth. Because the way it works is that the plants, through photosynthesis, they take the CO2 out of the air and they turn it into actual biomass. So one of the measures that scientists who study this use is the biomass of the Earth. And now we have all these great satellites up there and they can get really good ideas. And that 40% increase in forestation across the planet, they've seen it on satellite growth, where forests are encroaching on tundras and plains and other things where they weren't there before. And especially in Europe, there's been a lot of study on the temperate areas of Europe and their forests, and they are also all growing. And so the increase in CO2 is actually providing a benefit. For example, cotton crop. They did a test, 64% increase of cotton yield for the same amount of land by increasing the amount of CO2, increasing it by 100 million parts per million over the ambient CO2. They did all the 10 major crops that we use for food, like wheat and sorghum and things like that. And they were all about a 33% increase. There was another 33% increase in a bunch of other plant species that we don't use for food crops. And then the other issue that comes up is, well, what about ozone? Because the ozone damages plants, and it does damage plants. But it turns out that an increase in CO2 levels mitigates the damage to ozone. What it does is it allows plants to be able to handle stress in their environment at a much higher level, which means, what is stress in their environment? Well, it could be pollutants in the air. It can be drought. It can be insects, diseases, different things like that are all stressors on plants. And some plants are better at handling stress than others. But it turns out through 10 to 15-year studies, each one of these studies was done at least over a 10-year period because it takes a long time to watch the trees grow. They also saw that CO2 reduced the stress, so the plants could handle the stress better. And what you get is this idea through these studies that the higher CO2 levels increases the plant's biomass, it increases the speed the plants grow, it increases the growing season, it actually increases rainfall. And there's two kinds. There's actual rainfall and there's effective rainfall. Because when plants take the light and they go through the photosynthesis process, because light catalyzes the process, and you have CO2 and you have oxygen and you get glucose, and it turns it into carbon, which is the biomass of the plant. It uses oxygen as a byproduct of this, which we know, right? Plants take in CO2, they give us oxygen, and that's great. So go plant a tree. But at the same time, it uses water in the process, and it uses less water, so it's more water efficient with higher CO2 levels. So the bottom line is that there is a ton of studies that show, it's not refutable science, that higher CO2 levels actually help us from the plants that we depend on and the trees that we need. and that the whole process can actually help with food production and the density of food that we can produce on the same amount of acreage. So even though there's been a lot of deforestation that's happened by human hands, it is offset by the natural increase in the forest that's happened over the last 30, 40 years and longer. And as well, it would prevent us, for example, if we got up to, say, 540 or 550 million parts per minute, the deforestation would become a thing that wasn't needed. I guess I want to say that in a different way. We wouldn't need to take all of the forest land and turn it into more cropland because of the increased yields on our existing cropland. That makes more sense.
So what it sounds like you're saying, Brian, is there's two parts to this story. One is there's an alarmism over CO2 levels rising when a lot of the data definitively show that that's not necessarily a bad thing if you want the planet to be green. And then the other side of this that I don't think you've gotten to quite as much is the frustration with people that are saying, because CO2 levels are rising and because we're all going to decide that that's inherently bad, then we should start taking drastic measures to change our atmosphere.
Correct. So the scary part is if someone starts launching terrestrial objects into the sky and putting chemicals in the atmosphere in order to, on the one hand, cut off the amount of sunlight that's coming into the planet, which would reduce CO2 levels, but would also reduce the plant's ability to make photosynthesis happen.
Might reduce life levels, and that's something that we're all interested in. It will definitely
reduce life levels.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about is a catastrophic mortality event. If the CO2 levels are artificially dropped below a certain level, you can't even support plant life on the planet. And that level is not, it's only about a 10% change. So just like everything else in our fine-tuned universe that we have probably talked about, or we will in the future if we haven't talked about it, the anthropic principle, if the CO2 levels go too crazy, too quickly, then that's going to cause a lot of catastrophe on the planet. So letting the planet, it's kind of like God designed the planet to be able to take care of itself, and it knows how to self-regulate, because as the biomass increases on the plants and in the oceans, it scrubs CO2 out of the atmosphere and it keeps it balanced. And then they find out, turns out there's billions and billions and probably trillions of tons of carbon in limestone rocks. And how does that happen? Well, that's the oceans taking in that, and then the plankton and the other plant matter go to the bottom and they get crushed and they get turned into limestone. And so the planet itself is taking care of this issue. And the amount of CO2 that we're putting in is already being balanced by the planet. And we have a lot of smart scientists who have tested this and demonstrated that that is in fact the case. And they weren't expecting these results. They were expecting that the dire predictions were what they were going to find when they did their studies. And they found that even they do an annual prediction of biomass on the planet on where it's going to go. And every year, the biomass outstrips their predictions by a good 10 to 15%. So go ahead, Dan.
So if people in our arrogance try to step in and correct a problem that's not a problem, that could create a pretty big problem.
Yes. And that's what bothers me about this stuff is there's a political agenda, there is an economic agenda. There's a lot of people who are really pushing this idea that we are in a climate emergency and we need to take drastic measures to fix it. And most of the scientists, the studies that we will reference in our show notes and stuff, they said, if we cut out the pollutants, the industrial pollutants that we're putting in the air, the earth will just balance it out just fine. And we're already doing that, and we're trying to do more of it. So, we do need to pay attention, and it isn't like we can just ignore everything that we're doing as humans. But at the same time, it isn't really an emergency in the way that they're saying. And if anybody's ever watched Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix or read Fingerprint of the Gods by Graham Hancock and any of that kind of material, well, we know that the ocean was 400 feet lower in the past, and that there are ruins off the coasts of many, many countries that are buried under a couple hundred feet of water because people did live out there. And so this has all happened before, and that was not caused by human industrialization. So to take our current situation and the relatively mild climate that we've had for the last couple hundred years and turn it into a disaster, just not the smartest thing to do. So whenever you see these articles and you see these people that are Greta Thunberging it all over the place, just remember, there are a lot of studies that are saying that's not actually the case, and you just need to pay attention and be careful. And the world is much more resilient than we are being led to believe, I guess. So that's about all I have on that.
So what in the world is going on? Brian Brown says, stop terraforming Terra.
Amen.
There you go. Artificial surgery never improves things.
Never does.
For something that's already looks fine the way it is. It's funny. I mean, for people my generation, I'm not a lot, but a little bit younger than you are, Brian. From about the time I was entering college, then there was constant climate alarmism. And it was pretty new when I was entering college. And I took a lot of meteorology courses during undergrad and had phenomenal professors. And I was at a very liberal school. And one of the things they talked about was how well the planet could adjust to these things, because it wasn't cool to not say that yet. And so I remember being taught that CO2 is something that the planet is extremely good at regulating. And the other thing I'll throw out there is, since about that time, and we're going back over 20 years at this point, we were being told constantly, and this is around the time that Al Gore was winning Nobel Prizes, that there was going to be catastrophic near-term sea level rise. And there's a lot of science out there, including the IPCC report and some of these others. There's a lot of science out there that it keeps saying that sea levels are rising. And the thing that continues to weird me out about it is I can't specifically see in a very practical way where they're rising. I'm not saying that they're not. I'm just saying it's really hard to tell, like what coastline has changed since 1998.
And I have a really funny story that's completely related to this. When I was a freshman in college, the department, I had to take a general biology course. Everyone had to take it. And the guy who taught it was the department head, and he was quite the character, very funny, very good teacher. And he showed us a film in class, and I need to go figure out, it was a documentary. I need to figure out who this is. It was a British film company that created this documentary, and and it was about climate stuff. And I was a freshman in 1990. Okay. So I got out of the military and went into college. So yes, I'm older than Joel. He was very kind before. So they went through and they did things like they saw a study and they said, sea levels have risen in England, and it showed the particular place where they had these measuring sticks into the water on the docks that told what level was and the average sea level. And so then the documentary crew just went to the other side of the island, and lo and behold, sea levels had lowered over there because it was an island and it's not static. So parts of it was going down and other parts were going up, and then they were deciding that the sea levels were rising.
And see, that's the kind of thing.
But the funniest one was in the
1970s,
most major climate scientists were predicting a global ice age by the year 2000. And these guys went and they interviewed one of the preeminent climatologists of the United States in the video. And they said, now, isn't it true that some of your colleagues in the 70s were saying that we were going to have a global ice age? And this guy's, well, yeah, some data did seem to indicate that, but, some people were just kind of off. And then they read an excerpt out of one of his books where he predicted a global ice age. by the year 2000. And this was in 1975 or something when he wrote the book. And he's like, oh, interview's over. So
Yeah.
these guys are following the money. They're getting paid to research things for certain outcomes.
Yeah, you're not going to get any funding by saying the sea levels aren't rising, and you will get funded by saying they are rising. And I know that sounds really cynical, but to put that in context, I mean, we were told. I mean, I was shown Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth in undergrad as part of a course, and because it was new at the time, and it was this breakthrough thing, and I didn't think it was very impressive at the time. I guess that's why I'm not on the Nobel Prize Committee, among many other reasons. But if you follow the most recent data we have that's being cited today, the alarmist numbers are like, oh, it's been rising by 3 millimeters a year since 1993. Like, okay, let's we'll do the math. That's like 3 inches. Like, okay, that's not nothing. Let's say that's correct. Maybe it is correct that the sea levels have risen 3 inches since 1993. I just don't know whose life that's ruined at this point. So that's it. And I know there are people who would roll their eyes and say, oh, you uneducated swine, don't you understand how drastic this is? And I'm just trying to point out that there's a whole generation of people, now 2 or 3 generations, that are being fed constant alarmism. And it's switched, and the alarmism changes all the time. There's a lot of reasons why. But so far, the alarmism has been wrong across the board, and we could make a very long list of everything from Y2K to catastrophic sea levels to melting ice caps, and
don't forget about the population. The population explosion. Population explosion.
Yeah, I remember having I had undergrad professors at this particular liberal school that I did part of my undergrad at, literally telling us that because of swine flu, that everybody needed to go get masks and PPE equipment and biohazards. I'm not kidding, biohazard suits, because we were all going to die. And she believed it, and out of the goodness of her heart, she was trying to warn us that we were all going to die. And the point is, some of these things are true, and that swine flu existed. Some ice caps have melted somewhere or shrunk in some ways, depending on how you look at them and how you measure them. And that may be a thing that's happening. But is it having the catastrophic effects that we've been told? I mean, we were told that coastlines were going to be underwater, and New York City was in trouble, and most of Florida wasn't going to exist. And we've been shown movies about it. And what it comes down to is the best data we have is over the course of pretty good chunk of my life, there's arguably a 3-inch rise in sea levels. And to Brian's point, that may or may not be even measured accurately. So all that to say, we don't have to freak out about it.
It's slow enough that people can move.
Yes, exactly.
And for example, I know I've heard multiple times, there's an increase in tornadoes, an increase in hurricanes, right? There's an increase in all these things that are going on because of the climate. And if you actually go look at the meteorological data that's available from the U.S. government, it is simply not true.
It's just wrong.
They have not been increasing. As a matter of fact, hurricanes have been decreasing in frequency in the world.
Yeah.
Tornadoes have been decreasing in frequency. So they're literally telling you something on the news that is 100% counterfactual. It's just not. It's not true. And our own data that is published by the government supports the truth. But nobody's going and reading that. They're listening to what they're being told by people like Neil deGrasse Tyson.
And if you have enough degrees and credentials and you say it loud enough and frequently enough and with enough authority, then you can actually make a career out of saying stuff like that, because nobody cares if Joel disagrees or Brian disagrees, except for our wonderful audience, which is swelling into the dozens at this point.
Yeah, there's even memes out there about people just like us, Joel. We're ignorant people who are trying to tell the real scientists about what science is. It's like you're not allowed to use your brain and read something and get an understanding of what it is saying to you and make a judgment. It's an actual logical fallacy called the appeal to authority, which is used in debate. And that means that's when you're in an argument with someone and you're talking about abortion and you're saying, this is a fetus. And they say, well, are you a doctor? Well, if you're not a doctor, you don't have any standing to say anything on this, because if you're not an expert, therefore your opinion and your knowledge is worthless. And it's just not true. that's why it's classified as a logical fallacy.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I want to be clear. I'm not saying that I know more than a scientist. I'm not saying that I know better about these things. I'm just trying to take a step back and say, okay, maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. I believe there's a lot of garbage science, but maybe some of it's very solid. And I believe, by the way, a lot of scientists are very well-meaning. They're just in an extremely confined system, and they have to abide by that system if they want to publish and get funded. But setting all that aside, let's say that a lot of what they're saying is correct, and that there are things that are changing on the globe and that we should be concerned about it. All right. My question is, well, based on everything I've been told so far and how catastrophic this was supposed to be 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, how absolutely devastating it was going to be to humanity. And I'm just going, well, none of that's happened. And maybe and I say that knowing that some people would say, well, Joel, polar bears are dying, and okay, maybe, but I'm talking about the level of catastrophe that we were fed for years and years and years, saying, just told, like, move away from the beaches, flee the cities. It was that alarmist for a long time. And now it's, well, it might have changed by 3 inches. And we're going, all right, well, if you built your house 3 inches from the ocean, you might have had it coming, but otherwise you're fine at that point.
you had a problem already.
Yeah, exactly. So that's all I'm trying to say. And the reason why I'm bringing that up, dear audience, is to say there's a lot of signals out there that are telling you that very smart people who are very educated and very knowledgeable are very concerned. And that as a result, you should be too. And you could spend all your time being very, very concerned. That's something that's easy to do. You could be very, very concerned about climate, very concerned about, nuclear war, very concerned about population, very concerned about comets or whatever. There's 1,000 things to be concerned about, and any one of them could be very concerning. But as we talked a little bit about on our last episode, the right answer is not to live your life in a state of constant concern, because what we've seen is most of that is wrong. And when it's not wrong, meaning when there is something truly devastatingly concerning, there's a good chance that either A, it's going to be something that we totally didn't see coming, or B, really can't do anything about and really don't know how it's going to affect us anyway. So there's no reason. So logically, it doesn't make any sense to try to turn your life upside down if you're not sure if something's going to happen, or if you think it might happen but don't know what the result is going to be. Because, yeah, bad things are going to happen. It's a given. Bad things will happen. The world will change. There will be disasters. Some of them may affect you. Some of them will not affect you. And none of them, we're not trying to make light of any of them. We're just trying to point out that most of the things we've been told are horrific disasters and just waiting to end portions of humanity. They just haven't. And so it's a lot, I'm fatigued with the concern, and I think a lot of other people are too.
Well, and what I do is whenever I hear a prediction or some sort of an alarmist thing by credentialed people that should know what they're talking about, then I will go look for other credentialed people that also know what they're talking about in the same field, but they disagree. And what you're going to find is because it's double-edged sword. Because of our social media that we have, we're getting all of this alarmism from all these different sectors hitting us all at once, and it's overwhelming. But at the same time, when there is a narrative that is being pushed by some group, and usually it winds up being the mainstream media, they're pushing this certain storyline that they want to be put out there, and it's easy then for you as an individual to use that same internet and go find these other scientists that are saying different things, and you look at their credentials, and they have PhDs from the same schools, and they're working at credentialed labs, and they're doing science as well. Any of these scientific style issues in reality take many, many years and decades to get a real picture of what's going on. I mean, we even know that the climate models that were used for the IPCC famous hockey stick revelation, I think it was in 1988 when he presented to the UN about temperatures were just going to skyrocket and the world was going to end. That study, that entire study that was based on all of that data, has been so thoroughly debunked as one of the worst studies ever published by a lot of credentialed scientists. But who hears that in the mainstream media?
Yeah, he made a great career out of it, and I think if he could go back and say the same thing, he absolutely would.
And he still has that career.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many people were around to remember. I think it was probably around 2001, ClimateGate.
Yeah.
Where they had an email server got hacked, and the hacker released all these emails from a bunch of climate scientists, and they were emailing each other back and forth, and they were literally fudging the numbers on their reports to fit the hockey stick model. This kind of stuff goes on, but you need to go look for it. And most of our listeners are people that like to go look for things, so I don't think that'll be a problem. And they probably know more than we do about this already. So if you have anything to say about this, feel free to post it in the Telegram channel. We'd be happy to listen.
Yeah. And I do want to be clear too. We're not saying that there's nothing alarming going on out there. There certainly are. What we are saying is you don't want to be led around by the nose by mainstream media or people who just literally make a living freaking out about stuff, because there's always going to be something. And 9 times out of 10 or more, then it's just not something that we really need to be concerned about.
You just have to say Y2K.
Yes. Yeah.
That was the biggest non-event in the 20th century.
Now, I have a core memory around Y2K, because Y2K happened when I was, I guess, a junior going into senior year, something like that in high school. So I was, I can remember it happening, and it was interesting being a young man in high school at that time, because high schoolers are always looking for anything that means you might not have to do your homework. And so we were definitely all collectively holding our breath around that. And I remember people were pretty excited about it in my age group, like, oh, wow, are we going to wake up and it's all going to be wrong? And so I remember being at the New Year's parties and stuff like that. But what was interesting was I lived in the Monument area, and it was a lot smaller then. And I remember it was December 31st. And I remember going into the bathroom and turning on the shower, and no water came out. And the reason why was everybody was simultaneously storing water, and there was no water pressure in the system. And so the only actual problem was that everybody was worried enough that it caused a problem, and there was no water.
It was the great toilet paper shortage of 2020. It's the exact same thing. And
it wasn't the end of the world. It resolved relatively quickly. But that for me was a very striking memory, because I realized nothing's happened yet, except that everybody's suddenly getting nervous. And for the first time, it's not a common first world problem that you turn on the faucet and there's no water. And there was no water simply because everybody was worried that there might not be water, and so there was no water. And that was a learning moment for me.
Right, for sure.
So speaking of things that people are concerned about, there is, and Dan, if you want to give a quick summary of this, or Brian, you're welcome to. Let's talk about Wednesday, October 4th. And by the way, we recognize that this is genuinely alarming to some people, and we're not trying to make light of it or make anybody feel foolish. We just want to ask some of the hard questions about this this concern that is circulating on social media, and that a lot of people are worried about with what may or may not happen this coming Wednesday. And we're recording this on Monday. And some people are saying a very bad thing is about to happen this week. So, Dan, I'm putting you on the spot. Can you give a quick summary of that situation? And then Brian, you're welcome to add any color commentary. And Dan, if you don't want to, that's fine. I didn't cover off with you beforehand if you had brushed up on this one.
I mean, I haven't brushed up on it a lot. It's something that came up twice today in some different circles that was a little unexpected. But, basically there's this big test happening on Thursday with the emergency broadcast system. And there's people with the theory that that's going to trigger some event. The more extreme versions I've heard is it's going to turn everybody who got the COVID vaccine into a zombie. So, I mean, That'd be pretty alarming.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If
for
this
sure.
is true, we should be alarmed.
But it's also true that if you got the vaccine, there's nothing you can do about it. So
Yeah.
why would you be alarmed?
Yeah. So the broad strokes here are there's a national test of the FCC alert system happening, and Dan, I think you said Thursday. I may be wrong when I said Wednesday. It's Wednesday or Thursday this week. I think it's Wednesday, but there's a national test happening. My understanding is these tests happen every few years, but there's a lot of chatter that this one's going to be different and that there are frequencies that are going to happen. And when they say national test, that means radio, television, phones, everything simultaneously, more or less, are going to get an emergency broadcast alert test message. So if it's 12:30 on Wednesday and your phone makes a terrible noise and so does everybody else's around you, that's what it is. And you'll remember, like, oh, if we get this out before Wednesday, we'll try to. And if you've listened to it by then, which I know you guys eagerly devour these when we post them, then you'll know. You'll be in the know on what's going on and why your phone's doing that or why your TV or your radio is making that noise. And so
unless we were wrong. And then you'll be like, oh, that's why everybody's a zombie.
Yeah, unless we're wrong, and then you'll be glad that you were prepared. So the concern is there are some people, and I don't know where this started or how it started. There are people saying that this test is going to have new frequencies, and these frequencies are going to trigger everything from graphene particles in the COVID vaccine to EMP results in electronics, and that there's going to be widespread devastation, and that some powers that be are going to do this on purpose.
And nano machines as well in the COVID vaccine.
Yeah,
it's going to activate them.
Yeah. So, let's just start with should you be really concerned about this? So logically, there are two things. One is it logically, is that likely to happen? And I would say no, but if we're wrong and it does happen, then there's literally nothing you can do about it between now and Wednesday, and we'll find out on Wednesday. So I'm not going to change my life dramatically because I don't think I could get prepared for a zombie apocalypse between now and Wednesday. But let's just say, so that's the tongue-in-cheek response is,
well, the tongue-in-cheek one
life.
is, if you're not already ready for the zombie apocalypse,
you can't get
ready by Wednesday.
Yeah, there's I'll make one more Dick's Sporting Goods run or something in the meantime. But so that to say, is it do we believe or are we telling people they should be concerned about this? Well, logically, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to suddenly get concerned about something so near term, because it's either going to happen or it's not going to happen. But more specifically, when you start looking at the specific things that are being said, there's a lot of reasons to believe that it doesn't seem likely. One is the nanotech. And Brian, I know you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah. So there's a Christian synthetic chemist who is an expert at nanotech. He works in a lab and they build nanomachines. That's what he does for a living. There's an international competition every year where all these different labs that are doing nanotechnology work, they create a nano car essentially, and they race these cars. And his team obliterated all the competition the last time the competition went on by about 6 hours. And these things don't move very fast because nano is very, very small. So even a fast nano car doesn't travel very far in an hour, for example.
It's a billionth of a meter.
Yeah,
millimicro, nano, pico. I think 1,000 million, billion, trillion. I think it's a billion.
Yeah. Billionth. And so he has done a ton of video that he's podcasted. His big thing is
you're talking about James Tour, by the way.
Dr. James Tour, Tour, and he has a ton of content, and a lot of what he focuses on are debunking the origin of life researchers who are trying to prove the evolution that we came from a primordial soup, and they're creating all these experiments. And the average person on the street thinks that scientists have created life in the lab, and he debunks all of that. That has never happened. It's not even come close to happening. And the more they learn about molecules and biology, the farther the horizon gets into the distance. But in terms of nanotechnology, as far as he knows, and he is one of the foremost people, there isn't any real nanotechnology capable of doing something to the level of controlling people and destroying people's lives through, being put into a syringe and given as part of a vaccine. One of the main reasons is these things have a really, really short shelf life. So even if someone did create some nanotech, you wouldn't be able to activate it or deactivate it because doesn't have enough size or technology to be able to maintain any kind of communication network and all those kind of things. So there's a myriad of reasons why it's currently not really feasible to do it, even if somebody wanted to do it. So based on that information, I think that part of the concern isn't really a valid concern. It's just kind of somebody throwing out some crazy sci-fi ideas in that particular case.
So what you're saying is we're not really there with the nanotech as far as the leading researchers seem to know that there's something that's in a vaccine that could be triggered by a frequency that's going to cause devastating effects.
Correct. I mean, the closest that we have is what's called gene therapy. And you are injecting someone and they are changing genes in the body, but that's not nanomachines that's doing that. It's a bigger level of biology because genes are bigger than what we're talking about here. So,
yeah. And to make a long story short, I've tried to look up some of the other claims around this, around some of the frequency equipment and data. And the way I look at things is usually from a tech investing perspective and trying to see what equipment it would take to do this. And are there large purchases being made or companies that are blowing up huge amounts of new orders of new stuff? And I don't see anything attached to this. And the other thought process here is let's say that some nefarious government organization did have a plan to use sound or radio wave frequency to trigger something terrible in the population. I don't understand why they would do it at an announced day and time. In other words, they can turn on that equipment anytime they want. The frequencies that are making the radio and television and cell phone things go off are frequencies that are being broadcast all the time because you're receiving data on those frequencies all the time. And a frequency is just a wavelength or an amplitude of some sort of light wave. So if your television is getting that frequency all the time, it doesn't care if it's coming from, ABC news station or MTV, if that's still a thing, or that's cable, not frequency. But you get my point. It's those frequencies are happening all the time. So if something was going to be triggered, it would have been triggered by now. If there's some brand new frequency, some new wavelength that hasn't been broadcast on, that is going to be powerfully broadcast and it's going to create something, then there's no reason for them to have to do it simultaneously with a national test, because the national test is a very known frequency that's hitting cell phones, which we use constantly, radio and television, which we use all the time. So I don't know why it would be a specific event. They could just turn on the equipment to broadcast this new nefarious frequency anytime they wanted, and then nobody would know where it was coming from. And that seems like a much better, it seems like a much better plot to me if I was going to put on my Dr. Evil hat.
But now, from a technology standpoint, there's a lot more basis for damaging things happening via sound and wavelengths of sound than there are, say, for the nanoparticle side of the equation.
And microwaves.
We have microwaves, right? They're all in the same the same spectrum of energy, right? Mm-hmm. But even sound itself, we've been able to create containers made out of sound that can hold volatile liquids seemingly in the air using sonic waves. There are certain frequencies that are known to cause people to become ill and sick. And there's some fascinating things of certain places on the globe where anyone who goes into them, they're usually out in the middle of nowhere in the wilderness, get horribly sick or become completely disoriented. I believe Blurry Creatures has an awesome episode on this. And they talk about some different areas of the world where you just don't want to go in there. And there's all kinds of legends around those areas and whatever. But the current scientific thought on those areas is that it's some sort of a very specific wavelength that the Earth is generating in those areas that's causing this adverse reaction in the human brain. So at least that one has some amount of scientific basis to stand on, that they could do that. But you need a very powerful generator for the waves. And the problem is that your cell phone isn't going to do it, and your TV is not going to do it, and those kinds of things. It would have to be a big broadcast that was over the air. And, again, I haven't seen any giant dishes going up recently, so I'm not super worried about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that frequencies can cause damage.
Or heal people.
Yeah, and
if only we had a light frequency expert in the room,
Right. Like, part of a company that uses light, it pulses different frequencies that actually help heal cells and feed energy into your body in a positive way. And so certainly it can happen in a negative way, and it could, some of those frequencies can be pulsed at it with a fairly small device. So it's not that there's absolutely no validity to it. I'm not worried about something happening on Wednesday. But it's, and we're also not trying to make light of people who are concerned about these things. Because we know from Revelation that there's some rough days coming, and maybe some rough days are coming Wednesday. Maybe it's the following Wednesday, right? Maybe it's years from now. But rough days are certainly on the way. There's no doubt about that from a biblical perspective. So we're not making light of those rough days, but also would say, we're also commanded in the Bible not to worry and not to let those things preoccupy our thoughts.
Yeah, so I want to echo a couple things. So one, I think frequency and vibration are far more crucial than we, the collective capital we, society, has given them credit for. That was a terribly constructed sentence. I apologize publicly for that, the way I grammatically phrased that. But the frequency, electromagnetism, vibration, these things I think are to be taken much more seriously at some point than we have. I mean, I believe that when God speaks and things are created, I think he speaks and things are created. And it's probably a very different way of thinking about sound, which is just pressure waves, than we do. But sound does amazing things. And there's a lot of ancient evidence that sound technology was used to move and shape mass, and vibration is a big part of that. So I take that very seriously. In terms of our ability to manipulate those things, I think we are in the, very much still in the kiddie pool of understanding a lot of that, maybe getting our toes wet in some of the larger ponds of understanding it. But I don't think we're to the place yet, besides blasting information that affects people, to using frequency and vibration generation to really cause mass disruption. Now, you can do it. There are weapons and acoustic weapons and some of these things that can do this in a very focused way. And we, for example, it is not a weapon, but we're all familiar with microwaves. That's a wavelength, but it's not something that can be done in a way that disrupts society on a large scale. Maybe it is. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about it.
It is a weapon. It is a weapon. There is a truck-mounted microwave system that is used for crowd dispersal, and it causes you to feel extreme pain through the first several layers of your epidermis. It doesn't actually hurt you, but it feels like you're on fire. And when they shoot this thing at you, everybody just falls on the ground and starts to scream and roll around. It's actually really devastating, but it's crowd control. It's non-lethal.
So if you see those trucks on Wednesday, stay on the other side of them at least.
Just don't go near them.
Go inside. so yeah, I mean, and I've read up on some of those too. It's real stuff, and we're starting to use it because we're recognizing that you can do a lot of really interesting stuff with that. I heard something very interesting this week about somebody postulating that bumblebees fly through a vibration because we can't figure out how else they can fly, and that maybe there's some sort of frequency that they're able to use that shifts how they're interacting with matter and space. And that's a cool thought. I don't know, but it sounded very interesting to me. So to echo what Dan said, we're not making light of the fact that this is alarming. What we are trying to point out is there's a lot of things that we could be alarmed about, and the Bible doesn't call us as Christ-following Christians to be alarmed all the time. It's exhausting, and it's we need to be concerned about the things that concern Christ. So let's keep moving forward here, Dan. If you're,
I just wanted to throw out there,
Brian.
if people want to look up what I just talked about, it's called the active denial system. There's even a Wikipedia article, so you can go look it up and read about it yourself.
All right. I don't think you can buy one though. So,
well, not unless you're in the U.S. military.
Yeah. Dan, what in the world is going on?
All right, so this is a totally different topic, but another of these articles that we just passed around this last week. The headline is that there is a new gene editing tool that reduces unintended mutations by more than 70%. And so this has to do with the CRISPR technology, which we've mentioned before briefly, which is basically a gene editing technology. So a couple lines from the article is that they say their novel tool can potentially correct around half the mutations that cause disease. One of the problems with CRISPR so far, it says the primary risk associated with CRISPR technology is off-target edits, namely unexpected, unwanted, or even adverse alterations at locations in the genome other than the targeted site. And so, if you were getting...
Basically, it's like using a shotgun.
Yeah. Yeah, if you were having your DNA edited and there was a chance that the wrong place was going to get edited in a negative way, I mean, that's a pretty big drawback. And so, just I think the reason that article even came up is a couple of things. Like, as we're going through birthright, that's the type of stuff that is talked about with transhumanism. And so there's a bigger topic around CRISPR and gene editing. And it is something, and I think technology like this that makes it much safer tomorrow than it was a week ago, right, is something that it just is accelerating the timeline. It makes you realize, like, this stuff is coming faster than we realize. And so when I was looking into it a little bit more today, and thinking through it, I saw this TED Talk by a woman named Jennifer Doudna, and she, I probably pronounced her name wrong, but she won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for her work on CRISPR recently. And so in this TED Talk from April of this year, April 2023, there was a couple of interesting things that stuck out to me. One of the very first lines in her TED Talk was, quote, "The essence of being human is that we solve problems." And so I thought, okay, that's an interesting thing for somebody to say who's talking about changing human DNA, is that what really makes us human is solving problems, which I think when you really drill it down is kind of a ridiculous statement. There's lots of things that make us human. I don't think solving problems is at the top of that list. Lots of things solve problems. But then another thing that she said towards the end, was talking about how when you use CRISPR, you're basically using bacteria to go in and edit genes. And so she says that we're collaborating with the ultimate partner, nature. And so, coming at it from a Christian perspective, I'm thinking, okay, I think we're called to collaborate with the ultimate partner, which is Christ. And here's somebody who's advocating for, making edits to our DNA, and is saying the ultimate partner is nature. A few other things just from researching it today. Some of these gene edits can cause changes that you pass on and can be inherited. So that's an interesting thing to think about. One other thing from this TED Talk, which the TED Talk was only like 7.5 minutes, but she said that she explained this dream that she had where she was asked to explain CRISPR to a friend of a colleague. And when she went to meet this friend and explained CRISPR to them, the friend was Hitler with the face of a pig. So I don't even know where to go with that, but do with that what you will. But the point was she was acknowledging some of the bad things, right, that can be done with CRISPR. And I'll admit, like, there's a lot of good that can come from it, right? It can heal disease, and who wouldn't want that? Sometimes CRISPR seems like a godless thing, like you're messing with DNA and the way that we're knit together. But then, you can make the argument that anytime we have surgery or heal something or take medication, we're kind of messing with nature. We don't always let nature run its course in our bodies, and nor should we. Another interesting thing, there was a woman named Victoria Gray that was basically healed of sickle cell a couple years ago using CRISPR. And so far it's sticking. They really weren't sure, if it was going to last. So far she's a year or two into it and still doing well. And I found it interesting that the last line of an article about her, she says, quote, "I finally get to live a normal life and be happy. It's unbelievable." She says, "God did something great for me, and I'm happy about it." Okay, so there's somebody, at least, I don't know her belief system or where she's coming from, or if she's being generic with it, or but she seems to be thanking God for what CRISPR has helped accomplish in her life. And so, I think the reason we kind of bring up CRISPR and gene editing is, it's coming, and it is something that where a line needs to be drawn somewhere. Where does that line need to be drawn? I don't know. Maybe at the very beginning before you even get into it. But when we talked recently about Nietzsche and the Uberman, and certainly you can help get there with some gene editing and make people better than they are now. And the CRISPR technology is getting easy enough, good enough, cheap enough that this doctor compares it to copying and pasting within a Word document. Just moving genes around.
But that's, from another perspective, that's what's super interesting to me is, we constantly have this debate in certain circles on how religion has no place in science and it's anti-science and this kind of a thing. But in all of these technologies, and CRISPR is a great example of this, they have to use biological things that were created not by them, that were found, already existed, and then they can use different techniques to, for example, try to repurpose a virus to inject DNA sequences that they want to inject into the cell instead of whatever the virus would normally inject into the cell, which normally is itself. And bacteria, similarly, they edit the bacteria and they take certain chunks of DNA that were purposed for one thing, and then they replace it with something else. So they're getting this DNA and these patterns from other places as well. And they can certainly build their own DNA molecules now using this technology, but they don't necessarily know what they're going to do, because DNA is extremely complicated computer code, and it's in three-dimensional folds, and everything has to kind of snap together in the right way. And so the level of complication that is in the smallest single-celled organism is baffling to our minds. And the more we learn about it, the less we understand that we actually know. But these technologies are still predicated on using things that, I would say God put on the earth in the first place.
Well, and I think we have a little bit of a theme between our global topic that Brian brought up and then this much more micro topic that Dan brought up. And they both are humans causing unintended consequences that could be disastrous. Because on one hand, you look at this article that Dan referenced, and by the way, folks, we'll link as much of this stuff in the show notes as we can, so you can look at it for yourself. But on one hand, it's major breakthroughs in the ability to edit genes. On another hand, it's an indictment of the amount of unintended consequences they were having before this major breakthrough, meaning they were causing all kinds of mutations when they were trying to edit genes and causing all sorts of unintended consequences. So whether it's to the planet or to the genome, when you start messing with it, it can get real ugly real fast. I don't know, a 70% reduction sounds great, but that still leaves a whole lot of mutation possibilities there. And most mutations, as we've talked about long ago on other episodes, most mutations are deleterious. They're bad. You don't want them, whether they're natural or unnatural. The vast majority of mutations, when they happen, are not things that are helpful. It's a corruption of a code, and most of them don't make things better, faster, cheaper, stronger.
Well, none of them technically make anything better, but in some environments, that negative mutation, which does lose information in the cell, and you can never get that information back, can help the organism survive in a specific environment. But it's still not a positive mutation. It could be positive for the survival of that organism for that time in that place, but that organism can never take another route because it can't gain back the information to go back to the state it was in order to survive a different way. So there's a very good book written by Dr. Michael Behe. He is the one that wrote the original Darwin's Black Box, and it's talking about intelligent design. He is a credentialed biologist. He's a research biologist. He does that every day. And the latest book he came out with was called The Edge of Evolution. And he is talking about the boundary between what Darwinism can actually do versus what we see in the world. And it's very in-depth, very technical, very biologically technical. And he also deals with all of the new research that happened in the last 15 to 20 years since he wrote his initial book. And he also answers questions from critics and does all this kind of stuff too. But if you're interested in that topic and really want to understand everything there is to know about mutations and how they work, that is an excellent book to read. It takes a while, and if you're not a biologist, you have to look a lot of extra stuff up so you know what he's talking about.
So one real example that's easy to wrap your mind around about a negative mutation that can be positive in certain instances is having sickle cell trait actually provides protection from malaria. But if, sickle cell anemia is the next step, and that's not so good. One other thing to point out is just as we think about, what does a future with CRISPR have in store for us? There's all sorts of huge implications. One among them is, how many of these, how much of this research is being done on human embryos, which is basically carrying out pretty significant tests on unborn babies and killing them off. And, that's so there's huge moral implications with it all. And then the other thing with our humanity and how much we can mess with our DNA. I've seen things about, some scientists estimate that there's 1%, a 1% change in our DNA would make us, we're basically 1% of our DNA away from not being human, because so much DNA is overlapped with just being a living thing in general.
Yeah, I think we share like 96% of our DNA with a banana or something. There's a lot of funny comparisons like that.
Right. So, if we're not a whole lot of changes from losing our humanity, that's that's certainly something to keep in mind.
Well, one other beneficial thing that came out of some of this research, right? So the reason that embryonic stem cells, so what's a stem cell, right? The stem cells become other kinds of cells in the body. And stem cells are undifferentiated. So a stem cell can become any other kind of cell that it needs to be. It could be a muscle cell. It could be the cell wall, the wall of a cell in the skin. It could be, part of your eye, whatever it could be. One of the beneficial things that happened in the last 15, 20 years was that they figured out a way to create undifferentiated stem cells from other kinds of material. So instead of having to have a natural stem cell, undifferentiated stem cell, they could create them from other tissue. So the need for embryos in that research technically isn't necessary anymore. That's not to say people aren't still doing it, but now the technology exists to do the same experiments that they claim to want to do with embryonic stem cells without using embryonic stem cells. They can use any other kind of tissue and create stem cells out of that. So I guess that's a positive.
Well, and speaking of things to be alarmed about, it is worth being alarmed. Well, not worth being alarmed or changing your life over, but I think it's worth being aware of the large buildup of deleterious mutations in the human genome so far.
Oh, well, we're already past the expiration date.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but that's something that doesn't get talked about. And those are the things that are more alarming, are the things that don't get talked about. The fact that our genome is breaking down over time because we have all these mutations that we don't know how to undo, and that our genome is probably far less healthy than it was a few thousand years ago. So it's just something to tuck in the back of your mind, but it's probably not a particular problem between now and Wednesday. So you guys ready for the next one?
Well, I was going to say, are you not going to mention anything about the relation to publicly available CRISPR technology and hybrids?
Go for it.
Oh, no, that's your topic, bud. I mean, I can go for it, but I mean, we've talked about UFOs. We've talked about hybrid experimentation. We've talked about Nephilim hybrid breeding programs in ancient Mesopotamia and beyond. And all of the abduction stories and all of the different research that's been done in that arena, and these eyewitness testimonies, people saying this is what happened to me, and they describe the operating rooms and they describe what's being done to them. And essentially it all seems to point to the fact that their DNA and their genomes are being manipulated, and then they're using them for incubators and things like that. So there's definitely similar kinds of technology that would have to be employed in those arenas as to what CRISPR is. So the question is, we've talked about this before on other episodes of the different camps, the extraterrestrials that come from outer space and are evolutionary byproducts of other planets and other biospheres and whatever, versus the definition that we more prefer, that anything that wasn't born on Earth is not a terrestrial being. It's an extraterrestrial, and they're from other dimensions. And the Nephilim, they certainly qualify as extraterrestrials. I guess the Nephilim qualify as terrestrial, but they're half, right?
Terrestrial, but not necessarily human.
They're not human.
They're non-human terrestrials.
Non-human terrestrials. And then we have extraterrestrials, which were those that created the Nephilim in the first place. So all of the angels are extraterrestrials. They were not part of the natural order that God created on the earth. So, what technology is there? And then there's the other group that say that all of these experiments and these things are all governments doing it, right? It's government equipment, government technology that's hidden from the public, and they're experimenting on their own people. And so then the level of technology on manipulating DNA would be kind of like the public stuff got to a certain level, and then they had the real stuff in the background, and maybe releasing it slowly to corporations to, advance the science, so to speak. I mean, is anyone alarmed about that stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to decide where to go with it. It's it is alarming, and we do have episodes on it, and it is a topic that we absolutely enjoy. I mean, the genetic stuff is I don't think we've had an episode in a long time where we haven't mentioned genetics, because the genetic changing of humanity is probably something that we're going to be grappling with as a generation and as a species, and certainly as followers of Christ. I mean, I'll bring up it is on record, and we'll probably bring up the Vatican a couple times if we have time tonight, but it is on record that Pope Francis said in 2014 in a homily that he would absolutely baptize aliens into the baptism of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. I mean, that brings up a very big, theological question. And the Vatican's main astronomer, who's a guy named Guy Consolmagno, said he would be delighted if to find intelligent life and to baptize them. So it's an interesting. It's a really interesting question to bring up, like, how does Jesus Christ apply to non-humans? And biblically, the Hebrews is very clear that it says Christ died for mankind and not for the angels. The question is, how wide-reaching is that term? We don't baptize our pets, for example, into the baptism of Jesus Christ, because that would be weird, and I don't think anybody's ever even asked about that in church, as far as I know. But it brings up a lot of these questions on what if humans are genetically modified, then does the baptism of Jesus Christ still apply to them because Jesus Christ was human? Now, a minor modification or a mutation is not the same thing as Dan mentioned, where you're being modified to the point of no longer being human. Who draws that line? I don't know. I think it's one of those things where we don't know, but I feel like we'll know it when we see it. I'm not sure. So.
Well, but we also have the example of the fact that the spirits of the Nephilim are still running around Earth because they don't get to go to an afterlife.
Yeah, exactly. And they're
because they were not supposed to be.
Yeah, they weren't, but they have a spirit, but it was a spirit that wasn't supposed to be there, and now it has no place to be because it wasn't a spirit that God had authorized.
Yeah, so that would say kind of, probably not aliens becoming Christians, I guess.
Yeah, all kinds. I mean, they'll acknowledge the lordship of Jesus Christ, but that's very different from being under the blood of Christ. There's a thousand directions we can go there, but all that to say, don't be alarmed or laying awake at night worried about how genetic engineering is going to affect your life tomorrow or the next day or the day after that, or what you need to do or whether you should go outside. That's not the point. The point is to pay close attention to the decisions that are being made and the rhetoric that's coming out and the things that are being put into movies and videos and commercials and all kinds of stuff. I'm going to throw out there right now. I mentioned this to Dan and Brian earlier. Somebody very close to me was at a Beyonce concert last night, I think it was. And this person told me that the concert was so over the top with alien symbolism and occultic symbolism that this person who goes to a lot of concerts and enjoys them said, I couldn't take it and I left early because she was so weirded out by how forward this messaging was. And that's, and it's not done in a way saying that it's negative. It's done in a way saying that this, who there doesn't want to be like Beyonce. And this is the example that she's setting and what's being broadcast. So what we're trying to say is pay attention not to be up in arms or angry or full of hate or rage to the people who don't understand these things or who are confused by these things, but be paying attention to how you're being told to make decisions, or how your children are being told to make decisions, or how your loved ones are being told to make decisions, and how genetic engineering may become a very relevant thing. It used to be, do you eat a genetically modified tomato? I mean, that used to be the moral conundrum. I don't personally feel any conundrums about eating something that was possibly genetically modified. Most of it is at this point, but that used to be the big question. I think the questions around genetic modification are going to get a lot more specific and a lot more personal, to where it's, do you change this thing about your genome, or what do you believe about the application of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ to a different genome, even if a genome that shares a lot in common with humanity. So, what are
you going to do, with your unborn child's genome?
Yeah.
If something comes up and you want to make a change.
Yeah. I mean, very, very good point. These are very real things. And I wanted to point out the Vatican in particular, because that it represents an absolute thought leader. For those who are not familiar with religion, the Vatican is the head of the Catholic Church, which is the Catholic religion is considered Christian by mainstream media. It's a subset of Christianity, but it represents a huge portion of people that would be called Christians, and there are hundreds of millions of people on the planet who take what the Vatican says very seriously as spiritual and religious guidance for the answers to hard questions. And the Vatican has taken an absolute stand that non-human intelligent entities are to be considered under the blood of Christ, and has even gone so far as to say they may know more about spirituality than we do, and probably we should take them very seriously. And that brings up an odd question: is why is the Vatican talking about this so much? And my suspicion is that they know a lot of things that they're not telling us, because the Vatican is very involved in some of these things. And one of them that I sent to Dan and Brian literally just in the last few days was an article, and we can link to it in the show notes, but it was an article talking about how the Vatican had been brought in specifically to help study the comet fragments that were recently, was it comet or asteroid? There were fragments that were recently recovered from space. It was a big deal. It was where there was this huge NASA operation that had gone into space to capture fragments so that they could return them safely to Earth for study. And they immediately, and this article is from just in the last handful of days, the headliner of the article is NASA has begun a collaboration with astronomers in Vatican City. They will work together to analyze one of the asteroids that could pose the greatest danger to planet Earth. This asteroid is called Bennu. So setting aside another alarmism thing, the asteroid is called Bennu, and there's a possibility it could hit the Earth. Okay, so they got some fragments, and they're also studying this asteroid. And one of the things that they have turned to is the Vatican to help them make decisions around this. And it just raises the question, why? Now, it could be that the Vatican just happens to be one of the leading authorities on astronomy. And okay, that raises another question. Why? Why would the Vatican be one of the leading authorities in the world such that they need to consult with NASA on things that presumably are sample tests on something that comes back from, what are they looking for? So those are questions. I'm not trying to answer all of them, but what I am trying to say is these things are becoming theological questions.
Well, it's like we know that all of the ancient pyramids around the world line up on terrestrial and celestial and solar system bodies, and they're accurate. And you can even use star mapping to figure out when they were built, because they don't point to where they used to point, kind of a thing. And you can roll back the clock and figure out, this was built this particular, within this 100 years. Yeah. Archaeoastronomy. Is the Vatican lined up on any lines? I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, they are, sure. but why and which ones and how and which ones and why since and when? That's a hard question.
And what does it mean? Why do that? So there's a lot of stuff.
It does have some observatories, which is just a whole other thing on that topic.
Yeah. Well, I know that there are some extremely talented scholars that work at the Vatican that are part of the organization in a lot of different fields.
And
so it's not
Jesuits
beyond,
in particular are known for that.
Jesuits in particular, yeah. And it's not beyond the pale at all that maybe some of the foremost astronomers in the world actually are part of the Vatican staff. So
yeah. So it's certainly not. It's just very interesting to see that this overlap, the Venn diagram between Catholic theology and astronomy used to be touching a little bit, and now it's overlapping tremendously to where it's normal that NASA would be asking Jesuit scholars in the Vatican to help them study samples from an asteroid that they're particularly concerned about. It might just be looking at the porosity of rocks. Great. But and this is not the only case where the Vatican is one of the forefront leaders in this space. So you've got the Pope and astronomers from the Vatican saying really interesting things about baptizing extraterrestrial life You've got one of the newest and most interesting observatories in the world on Mount Graham in Arizona is owned and operated by the Vatican. And then, of course, here's another example of the Vatican working closely with NASA. I'm not saying anything for or against the Vatican, and I'm just pointing out that we as Christians, if we're following the momentum of these overlaps, we should be prepared to speak intelligently on issues like gene editing and astronomy and what's going on in the world, and asteroids. And for those of you who want to go down the Bennu rabbit hole of that particular asteroid, we can do that on a future episode possibly.
And if you don't agree with the Pope's pronunciation of putting aliens under the blood of Christ, then be prepared to be labeled a speciesist.
Yeah, be prepared to be labeled a hateful person.
Hateful speciesist.
Yeah. And for the record, I don't agree with that. I don't think alien extra non-human intelligences should be de facto baptized under the blood of Christ. I don't think that's biblical, and I don't think it's something that and it's not because I think they should all burn in hell. That's not the point. I do believe that there's a lot of extraterrestrials that are certainly subject to the wrath of Christ, even if you just speak in terms of angels and demons, and also subject to the love of Christ. I believe he loves his creation and doesn't take pleasure in the death of his creation. But what the salvation plan might be for an angel or a demon or any other part of creation that's not human, the answer to that biblically is we don't know. But it's not Christ's human death for humans, which biblically is for humans.
But there is certainly a difference between God's role as King of Kings and Lord of Lords versus Abba Father.
Yeah, there is, and I don't. Frankly, God can. He doesn't need my agreement to handle those situations however he wants. If he says, you know what, by the way, guys, in the far reaches of the universe, there's this other planet over here, and there's these things on them, and I've got a plan for them. I believe he does. I don't know what it is, but I don't think it's necessarily the human life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, because that doesn't make any sense from a legal basis, and it's not how the gospel is explained to us. Jesus Christ became human to represent humanity, and he does represent humanity, and there's a reason why the non-human entities out there, some of them that are rebellious against God, specifically don't like humanity as a result. So I think there's something very, very special about being human, and I don't think we should start blurring those lines and anything that starts saying, oh, well, it's actually not so special, and maybe this other thing over here is more special, and maybe we should be more like that. I think that becomes really thorny really quickly.
One important point of clarification is that no matter where it is in the universe, it is still going to be reconciled to Christ one way or another, because everything was made by him, through him, and for him. So,
yeah, and that's not universal salvation. That's not universal salvation. It's reconciled to the reality of Christ and the acknowledgement of Christ, where a non-human soul may or may not stand in terms of being in or out of the kingdom is a different question.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a fun rabbit hole. Do we have time for one more? I've got some what in the world is going on stuff out there.
Yeah, well, I've got one more that.
Yeah, go for it, Dan. Quick. Yeah, go for it, Dan. I'm not in a hurry. I'm just trying to make sure we get to cover everything.
Yeah. So another thing that just came out in the last week is that the FDA approved Neuralink for human trials. So if you're familiar with Neuralink, that's Elon Musk's basically brain-machine interface. Where
raise your hand if you think this is going to go extremely well.
Yeah.
I don't see anybody. This is the Tesla of brain implants. It'll be fine. It's going to go great on the first.
Oh no, it's not even that. It's the self-driving part of the Tesla for brain implants.
The self-driving part of the Tesla for brain implants. Like, yeah, we had some monkeys. A lot of them died. We're not talking about that. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, don't look at the monkeys.
Yeah, ignore the monkeys. They were all on death row anyway. Who wants to be the first human? And somebody's going to raise their hand and do it. Well,
so initially this is geared towards people who are paralyzed and giving them a way to control basically a computer with their brain. Obviously that's not the plan. Is not to stop there, and the stated goal of Elon Musk is to integrate computers and humans so that humans can keep up with AI. And where, basically the goal is to create human cyborgs. And I've seen an interview with him where he argues that people are already like cyborgs because we're so attached to our cell phones and that we can't function without, constantly looking at a cell phone. And, he has a point there that should give us some pause with how much we lean on that technology. And more and more you look around a restaurant and it's rare to see two people interacting with each other and talking. It's often an entire family sitting at dinner together, everybody's staring at their own device. So it's hard to argue along Musk's point on that people are already acting like cyborgs. But having a Neuralink implanted in your brain is quite another level.
It is, yes, and that is a story that is progressing rapidly. It wasn't that long ago when that seemed laughable, and now it's FDA approved. I don't know exactly how that process works. I've done enough work peripherally to biotech to know that FDA approvals don't come lightly or cheaply, and they often take a very long time. And this one seems to have happened really fast. It's suspiciously quickly how something this radical was approved for human trials. It's hard to get a drug approved for human trials, and even much harder to get it approved for commercial sales. And I don't know. I'm not an expert in that process, but this has happened fast.
Unless it's a COVID vaccine.
Yeah. That's setting aside the COVID vaccines, which happened extremely quickly. But yeah, that's a big deal. You're talking about changing of the human brain. And I think, Dan, I think you're being very kind with your comment that this is initially about paralyzed people. It's not. That's the window dressing is, well, do you want paralyzed people to walk? Well, everybody's going to say yes to that. Of course, we don't want people with, neural problems to suffer unnecessarily. But that's not really the problem that Elon Musk and et al. Are trying to solve here. They have a completely different vision than hey, let's go find a particular neurological problem and see if we can wrestle it to the ground and high five. I mean, that may be a byproduct, or that may be something that gets done along the way. But if so, it will be a happy little accident and not really what they're setting out to accomplish, because he's been very clear about his vision. His vision is to enhance humanity.
Oh yeah, this just opens the door to get it into human trials, really.
Yeah. I don't know where they're going to find that initial human, but I believe it's out there. And I think this is going to continue at a quick rate, and we should have thoughts on it. So speaking of artificial intelligence, couple of really interesting headlines in terms of what in the world is going on. One anecdote and then one headline in terms of what in the world is going on. And some of you know we did an episode on artificial intelligence that included guest co-host Jason Schott some months ago. And I think that topic was generally well received. And I think one thing we were correct about is it's continuing to speed up and change things. So here are two real world examples of artificial intelligence affecting life. One is an anecdote, and I have not. I just heard this recently enough that I have not done a lot of research on this. So if I get any details wrong, forgive me. And if anybody in the Telegram chat wants to add anything here, please let me know. But I have a good friend who is a recreational video game player. He loves to play video games, and he likes Call of Duty, which is a very popular video game. And a lot of for those of you who aren't gamers, the way video games work, it's not Duck Hunt and Mario anymore. They're played on the internet where you're playing against real people in real time, and you're playing these elaborate games, and you're interacting with other people who are playing, and it can be dozens or thousands or even millions of players playing in one-off portions of the game or on massive maps. And so it's pretty interesting. But part of that means people are communicating with each other, and historically, strangers competing on the internet don't have the best verbal manners compared to, people in general polite society. You've got a lot of middle school and high school people playing these games and shouting all kinds of obscenities into their microphones while they're playing. Well, the most recent version of Call of Duty that came out apparently has, as you install the game, has a screen where you agree to being monitored by artificial intelligence. And if the language you are using is deemed to be of hateful speech, then my friend who wanted to try this as an experiment agreed to that artificial intelligence monitoring, which I don't think was optional if you wanted to play. If you wanted to use your microphone to talk to other people in the game that you were playing with, then you had to agree to be monitored by artificial intelligence. And he was playing with a friend of his and said, hey, let's see if there's anything to this. And so they just picked certain key words and enunciated them a lot while they played. And lo and behold, afterwards, he was banned from using his microphone for a year in the game. So what that means is, so some people would say, oh, hooray, we should be making sure people use polite language. But think about the precedent this is setting. This is a digital verbal interaction presumably between strangers on the internet that is being monitored in real time and analyzed by artificial intelligence and deciding by the end of the interaction who's going to be allowed to speak and who's not going to be allowed to speak for the next year. That's the kind of thing that artificial intelligence can do and is doing. And if you think the fact that it's just applying to video games means it doesn't matter to you, well, there's absolutely nothing in the world to stop that from applying to all kinds of interactions, including podcasts, for example. Another real-world application of this, and this has been out there for a little while, is you can get transcripts of everything that's said in a YouTube video in digital text. And you can search those transcripts, and this isn't necessarily artificial intelligence, but you can search those transcripts for keywords. So now you put an artificial intelligence layer on that, and anything that's on YouTube or similar platforms can be monitored in real time, and keywords caught and highlighted, and decisions made about that platform or that content. And that's been out there for a while. YouTube creators are afraid to say certain things because it may get them banned.
If you follow any of the, different YouTube channels that are involved in political speech, there's like a list of 10 words that they just won't say.
Right.
They'll make up other words to go around it because they get demonetized by the platform, so they can't get any ad revenue anymore. And in some cases, their channel just gets turned off for some amount of time because they've said certain things, which are all protected by free speech, but you're entering into a voluntary agreement with a corporation, and so then your free speech rights don't apply to that level.
And now that's happening on platforms where it's not published content. The chat conversations between two Call of Duty players are between two players, often people who have joined up, have teamed up on purpose to play together. And now those private conversations that may have only a few other people listening in some cases are also being monitored and are affecting the person's rights and privileges on the platform. Keep in mind, you're listening to my voice through a digital platform right now. So I don't know where it's going to go, but I know that I don't like the idea of every word that we say that's digitally heard or recorded. Because what do we say anywhere that's not digitally heard somewhere? By the way, if you're talking to somebody in your car, it can be digitally recorded. If you're anywhere near your cell phone, it can be digitally recorded. If you're in a public space, it can be digitally recorded. So it's very much a surveillance state kind of thing. And the fact that became a real world application on a new platform in the last, in recent weeks is not encouraging. It's something to pay attention to.
Well, it's a voluntary digital surveillance, world that we live in too, because we kind of did it to ourselves.
Yeah.
But you had another article about
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks.
Yeah. Here's another one. So this is, and we'll link this. Tom Hanks says AI clone used to sell dental plan without his permission. This is from today. This is published on October 2nd. I'm seeing it on the Daily Beast. It's in lots of other places. So Tom Hanks had to publicly state, and I haven't seen the ad, but there is an ad, and he said on Instagram on Sunday, he warned the world that there is a video out there that is promoting a dental plan with what anybody looking at it at first pass would say, that's Tom Hanks talking about this dental plan. And it's not just an actor that looks like Tom Hanks. It's a digitally generated version of Tom Hanks, at least he believes. And I assume he's probably correct. I haven't seen anybody say otherwise on this. That there is a digital version of Tom Hanks advertising a dental plan. And the real Tom Hanks says, that's not me, and I didn't do that. So that's the kind of thing we talked about in our AI episode of things that would be available and probably happening. And the real issue here, folks, is not that technology is bad. That's not what we're saying. We're not Luddites. I mean, we like and benefit from technology. The issue here is the ability to know the truth about something and how technology can portray things very, very convincingly as true when they're not. Tom Hanks did not promote that dental plan, but with the use of AI, you can make it look real convincing that he did. And that's probably an awful lot cheaper and faster than hiring the real Tom Hanks to promote the dental plan. So another real world near term application of some of our recent conversations. Any comments on that or anything similar? I've got a couple of other things we can throw out there, or I'll just mention that we'll throw them in the notes.
Well, the scary thing about for me, the overlap of robotics and AI. So you have autonomous robots, and there's already a DoD autonomous weapons platform directive where they're putting out bids for companies to create platforms that can be used in warfare. So you don't put people in there, which that's a good thing to not have people on the battlefield if you don't have to. But at the same time, now it's different than drones, which are flown by humans. So you still have a human between the trigger and the weapon. And but if you have a fully autonomous AI-driven weapons platform, you're taking the human out of it. And I'm a software developer by trade, and I know that software developers are lazy because I'm one of them, and we have a lot of buggy code out there. And so for the same reason that I'm skeptical of artificial intelligence, say, running my life-saving heart monitor system or whatever happens to be going on, dialysis machine, I want those things to be simple and bulletproof. And part of the problem with AI is the algorithms are inherently non-deterministic. They can come up with new paths and different ways of doing things based on the data that they've been fed. So that is something that's moving a little too fast for comfort in my mind.
That's one problem with it is the code might not be good. The other problem with it is, what if it's really good and they can make as many of these soldiers as they want? Now you can have somebody controlling an army of millions of perfect soldiers that do everything with perfect efficiency.
And the thing is that this is the stuff of science fiction, but at the point we're at now, in the next 10, 15 years, that's going to be science fact. So they're already working on it. It's not like it's not happening.
Seems like a recurring theme tonight is what could possibly go wrong.
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Everything's fine. That's
going to be fine.
That's what we should title this episode. What in the world is going on? Everything's fine.
Because people are basically good and they don't want to do bad things.
Yes, and anything that smart people are coming up with is for the collective benefit of us all, so we don't have to be concerned, do we? Let's talk about what is out of this world. Here are a couple of interesting headlines. This is one that I saw come up several times, and I haven't talked, Brian and Dan, you may or may not know this one. I hadn't put it on our chat thread, but I just thought it was interesting while we were talking here. I've seen this one come up several times. I can't get to the bottom of exactly when and where it happened, but it's being widely reported. There's a gentleman named Ron James, who is the director of media relations for the UFO research group, MUFON. MUFON is Mutual UFO Network. It's a very well-established, I think it's been around since the 60s or something, network that is kind of an authority on UFO experiences and events and those sorts of things. And there's many very credible people who are associated with MUFON, and probably a whole lot of wacko people as well. But I don't have any reason to like or not like MUFON. They accept that they preserve a lot of data and do a lot of reports and get a lot of things out into the public that otherwise wouldn't be there. And so I can thank them for that. So I don't know anything about Ron James in particular, except that he's a high-ranking person at MUFON. He made some comments that he was told by Lou Elizondo, who was the guy who worked with the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP. If none of this stuff is making sense to you, you're just going to have to go back and listen to some of our old episodes. And it's, some of this stuff is dated, but fast-moving dated, where all these are new things that have come up in the last couple of years. So Ron James was told by Lou Elizondo that at the Pentagon, a large group of people were preventing further research. So the people at the Pentagon, by the way, are generally very high-ranking military officers. It's all brass, for those of you who know what that means in military speak. Very high-ranking military officers, for the most part, at the Pentagon, who are leading the shaping of military policy in the U.S. So Lou Elizondo reportedly told Ron James that at the Pentagon, it's very difficult to do detailed UFO and UAP research because there's a very large cohort of people who believe that UFOs are demonic. Now, this was being reported from the perspective of, oh, look at those fools, the idiots at the Pentagon, they're a bunch of nut jobs and they don't know anything. But I'm going to take a slightly different perspective and say, what do they know that would make a large portion of people at the Pentagon be highly concerned about research into something that could be that is being reported as a national threat by all kinds of different outlets at this point, when the Pentagon's entire job is to, protect the citizens of the United States and protect the national security of the United States. If that's their whole point and something is a threat, why would a large portion of them be concerned enough to say, hey guys, we shouldn't touch this thing with a 10-foot pole? So that's all I have to say on that particular headline. I just thought it was really interesting that it was coming out in public that there's division in the Pentagon. I'm not surprised that there's arguments and division in the Pentagon, but that somebody would go on record saying that it's an actual problem, that there are concerns in the Pentagon about demonic UFOs. What I will say in addition to that is we at Mystery Babylon have talked about UFOs and UAPs and unidentified flying objects and all sorts of things, and the alien threat and alien abductions and all kinds of stuff. We've talked about, we've had a lot of conversation about this. We are not of the position that UFOs are all demons. We have a very specific definition when we talk about demons. Brian alluded to it earlier, the disembodied spirits of the fallen Nephilim, where we don't equate demons as the Vatican would with just quote unquote fallen angels. It's not necessarily the same thing. There are fallen angels and there are demons, but they're not 100% the same thing. And we don't go so far as to say that every flying object in the sky is demonic. I don't agree with that, or even necessarily that certain alien subsets are demonic when you talk about different categories of alien or extraterrestrial beings. So all that to say, it was very interesting that this was being thrown around just in the last several days, that the Pentagon has a strong belief, or that large portions of the Pentagon have a strong belief that the UAP threat is of demonic or non-physical, I don't know what you would call demonic, some sort of very eerie origin that scares them. Anything you want to throw out there on that one, and then we'll keep barreling forward here when you're ready.
Well, if you go back to Jack Parsons and the Babylon
working, yeah,
the Babylon working, and the portal that they supposedly opened, and then he died and couldn't close it, and then we had a much increase of alien sightings and such things. Well, when you read the story of what was going on, then there was a group in the Pentagon at high levels that were against that whole project for the same reasons, and they said this is supernatural, evil. We shouldn't be touching this. This is just stay away. This is wholly bad. And they had a lot of influence and a lot of power, and they were able to stop various things. Well, according to the insiders that, have published many, many documents that they've gotten from the U.S. government over the years, that group supposedly still exists.
Yes, the problem is there's a whole lot of other groups that may or may not report to that group. Like I'm thinking CIA, for example, that has no such scruples, and we know that they
That's
go
right.
into all sorts of crazy stuff. I mean, I was explaining to somebody just yesterday that it's not a conspiracy theory. It is absolutely true that we had intelligence agencies spending a lot of money and a lot of time on things like remote viewing and astral projection because it works and because it's real.
And that's why the Stranger Things storyline is not actually that fictional in terms of the way that it started and how it all worked and the experiments that they were running. Those remote sensing experiments went on for years and years, and I don't even know if they've stopped, but
No, why would they?
Well, officially they did, but just because, they said they didn't really gain anything that was that useful. But yeah, the Stranger Things base storyline is actually quite accurate.
You know what's funny, Brian? I think that is probably the fifth time I have heard that in the last, I'll be conservative and say week.
Really?
And yeah, I think I'm going to have to watch Stranger Things. I haven't watched it. I know a little bit about what it's about, but it keeps coming up over and over and over. And maybe it's just the kinds of things I talk about. But I didn't know, for example, until yesterday that that Stranger Things had a lot of remote viewing and astral projection material. And now you're the second person in 2 days who's talked to me specifically about that part of Stranger Things.
All right. Well, you should do that.
Or maybe we'll do a Stranger Things
it.
episode.
Yes,
so
I enjoyed it.
I will. And again, there's a lot of stuff out there like this. So, for example, speaking of strange, Doctor Strange from the Marvel movies. I'm not all up to speed on all the Marvel movies, but my understanding is that he was somebody who would that his origin story basically is he's a sorcerer, and the way they explain the sorcery is very accurate, meaning he would project into realms and go fight battles in these realms with non-human powerful entities, and he would do this through what would loosely be under the umbrella of astral projection. Basically leave your body and your consciousness or spirit or soul or whatever it is, go into that realm and go have a confrontation there with some other being that exists in that realm, and then hopefully, provided the silver cord isn't cut, hopefully come back to your body and all is well. And that's a form of sorcery, and that is real. There are people who do that, and it is very tightly related to demonic realms. I'm not saying that anybody who's ever had an out-of-body experience is demonic. I'm not saying that at all. And I think near-death experiences and some of those sorts of things could be, you could cast the same net over all those things. But people who do this habitually, intentionally, and for nefarious reasons of power and control and manipulation, that is definitely getting into the demonic. And they may not realize it, but that's witchcraft, sorcery, and demonism. And the point we were making originally is our federal government has absolutely spent a lot of resources on those kinds of programs.
Well, astral projection is directly related to how you do remote viewing and remote spying that the CIA was testing and working on. So yeah, it definitely, the way that they describe the magic system that Doctor Strange uses definitely is related to real occult practices and books that were written in the late 60s and early 70s. There was a ton of them, and they're being written now still too, don't get me wrong, but it absolutely is the case that they're 100% related to each other. And just like, scripturally, one of the problems with our modern evangelical church is that most people do not believe any of these things are real. They believe that they were superstitious in some way, and God told his people, stay away from it, don't do it. But then you have the case, for example, the witch of Endor, when King Saul goes and he has her bring back the spirit of Samuel the prophet from the other side in order to ask him questions. And she does it. And Samuel shows up, and Samuel puts the smackdown onto Saul. But the point is that God never says those things aren't real and they don't work. He says that's not what you're supposed to be doing as my children, that those things are coming from a set of knowledge that were given to you by the angels that rebelled against me for their own purposes, because they want to create chaos on the earth and they want to wrest the dominion of the planet from mankind. And all of these things are detailed heavily in all of our episodes on Timothy Alberino's Birthright book. But the stuff's real. It does work. It's not like it's fake. It's not charlatans. It's not made up. In our current world today, with the materialism is rampant and supernatural things aren't real, and on and on and on. And how can you even believe that someone rose from the dead? That's just ridiculous. Well, that is, I think, one of the biggest coups that the enemy has been able to get over on the modern world, is that all of this supernatural stuff is just myth and it's not real, when in fact it's demonstrably real. And people that are involved heavily in the occult, they know it's real.
Oh yeah.
They don't have to have faith in it because they can see it.
They believe it's very powerful. And for example, who will most loudly tell children not to play with Ouija boards are people in the occult, because they know how real and destructive it is.
Absolutely.
The people who actually have had experiences with this stuff are like, yeah, stay away, because that stuff will chew you up and spit you out. It's the people who think it's all fake, who are the people who take it lightly. The people who have actually delved into it don't take it lightly. And that includes large swaths of our federal government. I mean, for example, I'll put another one out there, MK Ultra. MK Ultra is a very demonically sus program to I don't think I've ever said those two words in that in that order, but very suspicious program. And it is not a conspiracy theory. I'm looking right now at CIA.gov in their reading room, and we'll post it, document 06760269 is their description of the MK Ultra stuff that they did. And MK Ultra included, by the way, a lot of horrific abuse of innocent people in order to see if they could fragment minds for control and get people to behave in ways that were directly based on knowledge and understanding and manipulation of consciousness and the human spirit. And good news, though, they stopped. And so none of that happens anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
It worked so well that they decided they didn't have to do that anymore. And if you believe that, then I don't know. There's all sorts of cliches if you believe that. So the point is, when I see an article about where somebody says, "Oh, it's really annoying that this large portion of the Pentagon was afraid of this," like, well, maybe those guys know some things we don't. It's probably not because of what they were reading in their picture Bible. There's probably a little bit more to it than that.
Right. Exactly. Well, I have one that's it's something that happened. So archaeology, I follow a lot of archaeology, and then this one falls under the category of ancient peoples weren't as dumb as we thought they were.
Oh, really? Imagine that.
Yeah, if you've listened to the podcast,
I'm extremely sarcastic tonight. If you guys haven't noticed, I'm more sarcastic than usual. I apologize if that's putting anybody off.
Well, it's just, you got to take the good and the bad with this podcast.
There you go.
So, if you've listened to the podcast for any amount of time, it's evident that I'm a huge fan of C.S. Lewis. And one of the terms that he coined is what he called chronological snobbery, meaning that every generation looks on the previous generation with a certain amount of snobbishness and scoffing at them, and, oh, they were so dumb. And the farther back in history that you look, the dumber the people were. So, Zeus was the head of the the Roman pantheon. No, I'm sorry, it was Greek. Yeah, it was Jupiter. He got renamed, but he was the god of lightning, and he had all these powers. Well, they were just ignorant, and they were just worshiping the storm because they didn't know what it was. That's the kind of explanations that you hear, and I'm sure we've all heard these kinds of explanations. Well, also we've been told that the Greeks are, that's the foundation of Western society or Western civilization, right? They gave us all this math and philosophy, and in fact, they did provide us with a lot of written records. And so everybody in school had to learn the Pythagorean theorem, right? On a triangle, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and it tells you how to find the length of the diagonal of a triangle. And turns out they just found a tablet that's over 1,000 years older than Pythagoras, Babylonian, in their number system. And it clearly demonstrates them solving for the diagonal of a rectangle, which is the exact same formula. And they knew that and a bunch of other advanced mathematical concepts way before Pythagoras was around. The more that we find archaeologically, the more that we find that they knew a lot of things that we didn't discover until the last couple hundred years, in some cases, especially when it has to do with, let's say, what's it called? It's a pyramid complex in Mexico, Teotihuacan, something like that. I know I'm pronouncing it wrong. I'm not getting it right.
I mean,
but
Chichen Itza and many of the others.
No, it's a different one, and
Okay.
It has all these mounds that were pyramids that they've been excavating.
Yeah, I know which one. Yeah.
Yeah, an American engineer figured out mathematically that from the central temple of the sun out on the radius in a perfect line that lines up to the Milky Way, these temples represent the distances between the planets. And not just the 4 or 5 planets they knew about before we had strong telescopes, all the way to Pluto. And this was built in 2500 BC or something.
So this wasn't because they had excellent telescopes. It was because they were getting a data. Somebody was telling them something.
Somebody gave them a data feed, and they were able to get this figured out. I mean, there's a lot of amazing things about that complex that are just mind-bogglingly hard to understand how they could have done it. But go back, look at these things, look at some of the archaeology that keeps coming up and things that they find. Oh, these people knew about this. How'd they know about that? They were all ignorant savages who were just worshiping the sun, the moon, and the stars because they didn't know any better. And in fact, that's not really the case. So yeah, throw that one out there.
Yeah. I don't have the exact quote at my fingertips, but it makes me think of the historian Will Durant, who was considered one of the greatest historians. I mean, he wrote the volumes of human history and was a very wise guy with the amount that he knew about human history. He dedicated his whole life to studying and writing and collecting human history. And he has a quote. I've read some of his books. Fallen Leaves is a pretty interesting one. I've read some of his books, and one of the things he says is, when I was young, I thought I was smarter than the collective human history that went before me. And the older I get, the more I realize they knew a lot more. And I should have not been so, and this is specifically on religion. He says, I should not be so quick to throw out all the things that, basically 6,000 years worth of human history all took very seriously, and just think that somehow I have it figured out and that I'm smarter than they are, and they were a bunch of ignorant fools. He has it in a very elegant quote, and if I find it, I'll link to it in the show notes. But the point of what he was saying is, it's to our detriment, not to our benefit, when we look at the past and just believe that we know a whole bunch of things that they don't know and that they didn't have anything figured out. There's a reason that the ancient peoples took weather and storms seriously. There's a reason that the very ancient peoples were afraid of the planet Mars. There's a reason that they took gods seriously. And I'm not saying that they were correct on all of those things, but I'm saying our laughing off of all of that is short-sighted. So
the arrogance of humanity is another recurring theme tonight.
Yeah. The arrogance of humanity. That's a good one.
For sure.
I've got a couple of, I shared a couple of images with Dan and Brian that are pretty interesting. I'll link to them in the show notes. They are from the NASA Mars Exploration Rover. And NASA publishes a tremendous amount of images, and these are directly from the mars.nasa.gov site /raw images. You can look at the navigation cameras from the rover, and some people, and every now and then I'm one of them. I don't take credit for finding these ones, but I've found some fun stuff on the moon and stuff like that from some images. some of them have stuff in them that shouldn't be there. And I sent 2 in our chat thread earlier where you're looking at the horizon going, what is that thing flying through the air over there? It shouldn't be there. And then if you check the images taken shortly before and shortly after, it's not there. It's just in this image. So something, presumably, just looking at the images, it looks like something flew by the rover. It's not it doesn't look at all like the Mars helicopter drone thing that they sent up there either. It's something else. So I can link to those, and you can look at them and do with them what you will. I also had a very good time earlier this week when I was taking slow motion videos of something and saw what appeared to be a UFO flying through the sky, and got together with some friends and did a deep dive analysis on it, and it was a bug. So that was a big letdown. But I'll let you know if we get anything. I'd sent a screenshot of it to Dan and Brian because in the screenshot, it looked exactly like a disc. We're like, what is this in this image? And we did zoom in, enhance, and isolated the frames and played them forward and back. Like, it really looks like it has flapping wings. And I think it was a bug that flew across my screen. But it was a phenomenally entertaining, 20 or 30 minutes of looking at that video and trying to figure out what is this thing that just zoomed across the sky. So I am fine being wrong about things, but it's fun to keep an open mind and look at stuff. And every now and then there's something that is truly interesting. And otherwise, it's just another interesting angle to look at the world. So Dan and Brian, anything from anything we've discussed tonight or that you want to make sure we include on this recording? I know we're getting around to the 2-hour mark here, and we try not to go too far. We don't try. We just tend to hit the 2-hour mark. I want to make sure you guys get a chance to have the mic, and then we'll go ahead and wrap this one up.
I guess. I have some concluding thoughts.
Here, this is the time.
Shoot. Right. Go for it, Dan.
All right. So, we've talked about a lot of things that could be alarming, and that are going somewhere. Between people. There's people out there who legitimately want to change the atmosphere of the Earth to stop global warming. That could be pretty disastrous. There's research is forging ahead on gene editing and CRISPR, and that's not going anywhere. Neuralink is not even the only company doing things along those lines of Neuralink, and that's certainly not stopping anytime soon. And so there is some alarming stuff out there, but I do want to just bring it back to Christ again, and because that's really where we need to rest, because none of this stuff surprises God. We might be surprised by how fast the world is changing, but God's not. And we are commanded not to worry. The Bible is really pretty clear on that we're told very directly, do not worry. In fact, we're told the opposite, right? To be joyful always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. So all these things that are going on, even if some of them are not going to end well, and that's okay, because God still got this. Jesus still wins, and so that's part of why it's so important to make sure that we align ourselves with Christ, and that we pledge our allegiance to Him, because He's the one that's going to win, and whatever things come, and whenever they come, whenever things fall apart, because we know they're going to, but we also know the end of the story. And so I would close it with that.
Well said. We appreciate that, Dan.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add today in terms of, there's always a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of topics that you can follow and go down lots and lots and lots of bunny trails. And what Dan said, we need to take it to heart, like on October 4th. God knows what's going to happen on October 4th or not. And he said that he works things together for the good of those that love him and are called according to his purpose. And so that's something that we just have to trust in and have faith in him. And, sometimes his people go through tremendously bad things. There's persecution in churches, there's natural disasters, but you still have to trust in what he's doing in each of our individual lives. And that has worked pretty well for me so far. And I'm just going to continue to do that.
I'm thinking of a particular Bible passage from Proverbs chapter 3. And if you get down, I think, and I'm trying to pull it up here while I do this, you get down to right around to verse 25 and 26, then there's a passage that says, "Have no fear of sudden disaster." And we've talked a lot tonight about sudden disasters. But what the verses say is, you need not be afraid of sudden disaster or the destruction that comes upon the wicked, for the Lord is your security. He will keep your foot from being caught in a trap. It doesn't say that sudden disaster doesn't exist. It doesn't say it will never happen. It says that we have security in the Lord and that he's the one who keeps us from being caught in a trap. Not all of our, clever thinking. It's not our our preparations. I'm not saying you shouldn't prepare. Do be prepared. Keep in mind that things will go wrong, and you should have some thoughts about what to do if and when they do. And we just don't know how wrong or specifically how wrong. A good indication of what's not likely to not happen is when somebody gives a very specific time and date of exactly when the sudden disaster will happen. It's not sudden if everybody saw it coming. There will be disasters. We've talked about problems. We've talked about everything from the genome to the state of the financial system. And I think we all know that there are issues because mankind is riddled with problems. But if you are walking with the Lord God by Christ, then these things in Scripture apply to you. And that includes this instruction in Proverbs 3 that says, do not be afraid of sudden disaster. Don't be afraid of the things that are going to sweep the wicked away. And I don't say that out of... there's no glee in that. What it's saying is when disaster comes, there is a difference between somebody who is wicked and doesn't fear the Lord versus somebody who does fear the Lord. And the promise here is that the Lord preserves the people who fear him. So the best thing you can do in terms of preparation is to make sure that you are right with God. And we at Mystery Babylon believe, and we get this not from ourselves, but from Scripture, that happens through Jesus Christ. So if you haven't reconciled with your Creator through Jesus Christ, and you're concerned about disasters, that is absolutely the first step you should be taking. And not only is it the first step you should be taking, it's a step that you should be taking every single day, not for salvation's sake, but to be walking with the Lord every day, to be walking in Christ every day, to be fixing your mind on him. We're told in Philippians 4 what kinds of things we're supposed to be thinking about, whatever is good, noble, right, pure, excellent, praiseworthy, admirable. Think about these things. And it's very close to the rejoice in the Lord always section that Dan mentioned earlier. And these are reminders for us too. I mean, it's easy to get, and I'm speaking to myself, it's easy to get, cynical and sarcastic about some of this stuff because it's real. It's frustrating. It's frustrating to watch lies be told again and again and again. And it's frustrating to watch things be destroyed that don't need to be. And it's frustrating to watch people get hurt and people suffer because people in authority, don't show love and care. But it's not up to us to fix all that. It's up to us to walk with Christ and extend him everywhere we go so that lost people see him through us and say, how come that person's not afraid of sudden disaster? So I encourage you to be wise and shrewd and thoughtful about how you prepare and how you think about things and how you read the news. And hopefully we've given some example of that tonight. And hopefully there's some positive things in the example we've discussed. so we do encourage you to do that. But most of all, the best preparation you can be doing is in Christ. There's something I may have mentioned it in one of our recordings before, but it's something I've been reflecting on a lot this summer. Some of you know that I love to run long distances, and I recently ran my first ultra marathon distance, and it was a lot of fun to prepare for and to run that distance. And you reflect a lot when you. So in training, I ran something like 1,000 miles during the spring and summer of just training miles, and I don't always get the chance to run that much, and I enjoyed it. And there's a lot of clear thinking time out on the trails. Anybody who hikes or walks or runs or rides their bike or even just enjoys long drives in the mountains, then it's head clearing and you think about stuff. And when I run, I very rarely have headphones, and so it's time to reflect. And one of the things I was reflecting on is, what if I knew for a fact or strongly believed that the safety of me and my loved ones depended on my ability to run a certain distance in a certain time. So let's just say I thought that, let's just say I had good reason to believe that if my family is going to be protected, by summer of 2024, I need to be able to run from Monument to, to Durango, Colorado as quickly as possible, hundreds of miles. So let's just say that I believed that was going to be necessary. How would that belief be affecting my day-to-day? How would I be training? How would I be, what would I be buying or not buying? What would I'd be thinking? And what would every day I'd be thinking, okay, I've got to be prepared for this journey. I've got to have the physical fitness and the equipment and all of this. And you got to be able to solve the problems as they come up. And you got to be able to have, you have to have a plan for everything that could happen, and then a contingency. And that's how you get through those very, very long endurance runs. And that ultra mindset kind of gets you thinking that way. And then I started feeling very convicted, because I thought, well, I don't believe that the safety of my family or my own personal well-being believes on my ability. I think it's good to run long distances, but I don't believe that that's necessary for my salvation, for example. I do believe, though, that some of these really trying things in the world and these deep spiritual challenges are coming, and I do believe that I'm going to live to see some of them. I don't know which ones in particularly, but I believe, as we've talked about tonight, that hard times are coming, and that there will be disasters. I don't know which ones, and I don't know when, but I believe there will be. So the question I started really feeling convicted about is, spiritually, what am I doing to prepare for that? If I believe that there's going to be a physical disaster, I prepare for it. And, you have a food plan, a water plan, a transportation plan, a backup plan, a safety plan, a security plan, an evacuation plan. And it's actually kind of fun to think through different scenarios and say, okay, what do we need? What would we do? And you can only, I don't recommend becoming obsessive about it. Don't spend all your money on it, but, have at least a basic plan in place. What happens if the electricity goes off during the winter? What are you going to do? How do you make sure your family stays warm? Have a plan. And it can be a basic plan. But spiritually, what happens? Let's just say that there is, in the next 12 months, some sort of major disclosure event around extraterrestrials. We've already lived through a couple of major disclosure events. Most people today know that the federal government and secular authorities are acknowledging the existence of non-human intelligence that is affecting us on a security level. That's a thing that's happened this year that wasn't happening before this year, or has happened much more blatantly this year. Okay, that's a spiritual challenge. The world's facing it. How are you ready for that? Now, what happens if those things become much more overt? How are you spiritually prepared for that? How are you spiritually prepared to have a conversation with somebody who wants to know whether or not aliens should be baptized? What do you know about the gospel of Jesus Christ? Are you ready for that? How are you prepared for somebody that says that you need to have some sort of genetic modification to your body, or else you're a hateful person? Or that you need to advocate for some sort of genetic modification, or else you're a hateful person? We've already lived through some things, arguably through some early stages of that, through some of the, through some of all the vaccination stuff that's gone on. Of, well, if you don't do this, you don't care about people, and that's a very hard position to be in, and it's a spiritual challenge. So, more and more, I felt the conviction on, okay, I can get my head around going for a run every day and eating nutritiously and focusing on stretching and strength training and mobility and massage and all this, so that I know my body's in good condition to take on a challenge when it comes. And I can even, take on versions of that challenge by signing up for big races, and it's fun to do. Great. What about spiritually? How am I training? What does spiritual training even look like? And I have some thoughts and some answers to that, but I kind of want to lay that out there, not out of a fear-based place, not because we should be afraid of sudden disaster. We don't need to be afraid of sudden disaster. The Bible doesn't say that it's down to our preparation. It says it's down to the grace and the mercy and the loving kindness of our Creator. He's the one who takes care of us. But if we want to rise to the challenge and serve Him well, if we want to be tested and pass, and he does say that we're tested in hard times. That's biblical, that we are tested by difficulties. If we want to pass tests, we should be ready for them. And that means knowing your Bible. And we've done episodes on that. And that's why we talk about these things and we bring scripture into it. And that's why we do things like Trust Your Bible episodes. It means paying attention to what's going on in the world, thinking about those things biblically. It means looking at the flaws in your spirit that you need to address. It means considering your habits, looking at finding the things that stand between you and the Lord and ruthlessly eliminating them from your life. So those are the kinds of things we want to encourage you to. And we believe that kind of preparation is far, far more important than, stowing away a certain amount of dried goods or bottled water or weapons or ammunition or anything else, or even running long distances, which is something close to my heart. So all that to say, we finally rest upon the love of Jesus Christ and His death and resurrection for us. And that's what Dan was reminding us of earlier. It comes down to Christ. The victory is in Christ. Go read the end times and Armageddon passages in Scripture and see how Christ definitively triumphs. No matter what the world and all the extraterrestrial forces can simultaneously throw at him, he definitively triumphs. Psalm 2 says he wins with an iron scepter. His rule is not shaken. And so if you can start by trusting Christ and saying, Lord Jesus, when that happens, I want to be considered part of your kingdom. I want to be under your mercy and under your blood. And I want to do everything I can to be the best possible citizen of that kingdom that I can and bring as many other people into the safety of that kingdom as I can. Then you have absolutely nothing to worry about. And it will be an adventure. You're not going to be bored. It's an adventure to follow Christ, and He will call you to things and to excitement and stretching your mind and your spiritual concepts further than you ever thought possible. So we say all that to remind you of what's true. We appreciate you joining us for this episode. We appreciate the opportunity to share these thoughts. I appreciate Brian and Dan joining me to talk about this and that. And we love the fact that so many people are really getting a lot out of this, and that we get to hear from you all about how much you're enjoying the podcast. It's so much fun to have people telling us, oh, I really liked that episode, or hey, that was really helpful to me. We don't do it for the accolades, but it's encouraging and it's fun to know that people are getting a lot out of this. So that's our prayer and our hope, is that you are edified and uplifted and encouraged towards Christ and towards Scripture by this podcast. So that wraps up episode 21 and our first segment of What in the World is Going On. And we look forward to the next episode.